which I've done, and then we can have a chat about what happened. So you worked for a dog kennels in South Yorkshire
Yeah,
that housed police dogs.
it did, yes.
Okay, and can you tell me which year? We don't need to be more precise than that you worked there.
Oh, right. If I work it out, so left college, I think it was 2013, 14.
Okay, 2014. So the kennels housed, we know, dogs that were kept by the police. I
Yeah.
suppose the first question has to be, was the kennels run by the police or was it run by somebody else?
No, so it was a contract that was given by the police to the owners of the kennels.
Okay, and presumably you would have no idea whether the contract was put out for competitive tendering or anything else.
No idea, no idea. I know that the owners of the kennels, it was the big money maker for the kennels.
Was it?
It made much more money than anything else that they did.
So what else did the kennels do other than house police dogs?
So they also had a stray kennel. They, by the time I was leading, they were starting to do training and boarding, which I just thought was ridiculous. I think they now have like an agility course and stuff as well. I don't know.
So I would presume that the stray kennel would take dogs from the local authority,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the police kennels would take dogs that were seized by the police.
Yeah, definitely.
So what was the difference between the way in which the police dogs were handled rather than the stray dogs?
To be honest, there wasn't much. The stray dogs, we did behavioural assessments on ourselves to see whether they'd be suitable for rehoming, which it really wasn't good enough for the dogs anyway. But other than that, there was really no difference. The police dogs were treated slightly better in that they had indoor kennels. So
Yeah.
their kennels weren't out to the elements all day, whereas the stray kennels were, those doors would like led straight out into outside, where there wasn't a door between them and outside. It was just their kennel bars and then outside. Whereas the police dogs were indoors. They were kept inside inside buildings.
So let's just looking at the way the police dogs were coming in. They came in, as I understand the situation to be, because they were thought to be dangerous dogs.
Yeah.
Either because they were thought to be pit bull type dogs or similar, or they'd bitten somebody.
Yeah.
So, what, in terms of their kennel, how would you describe a kennel for one of those dogs?
So the kennels were concrete. They were just concrete kennels, with lots of holes, old concrete. They were built in the 90s, I think, and they've not been changed since. They had one heating pipe that ran along the back. That was it, just an old rusty pipe. That was their heating. They were they varied in size, so none of them were any wider than about, I'd say, 3 feet wide, but
Right.
some of them were as deep as, I'd maybe say, some of them were maybe like 20 feet deep. Some of them were maybe like not even 10 feet deep.
And could the dogs get outside to exercise?
No, outside. So once the police brought them in and they were put in their kennel, that was them until they left. They never got out.
They were stuck in this kennel at best 3 feet wide by 20 feet wide. And what exercise were they given every day?
None. So lots of them would just jump constantly at the walls. They would run up and down their kennels. That was it. They didn't get any kind of exercise. They weren't given any attention. They weren't given anything. They were given no toys. We weren't allowed to give them anything that they could possibly be possessive over. So that meant toys or anything, or treats or anything like that. They were given nothing.
So how were they fed?
So some dogs, they were fed through. Most of them, it was you shoved a bowl underneath their kennels. You just literally shoved it at them. If the kennel, you couldn't fit it under the kennels, a lot of the dogs were trained to just take a rawhide chew and take it to their beds, so you could open the kennel doors and put the food in. But some dogs were too bouncy, They would say to us that they were too aggressive to open, but it wasn't. I know the difference. It was just the dogs were bouncy. They just wanted out. So they would try and like run at you if you opened the kennel doors. At which case you got to chuck their food in. Literally had to just throw it at them.
Seriously.
At least that gave them the enrichment of trying to find the bits of food in their kennel.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I suppose it did. So, how long were these dogs kept in those conditions?
Most of the dogs, most of them were in there for months. I don't think it was a quick turnover for any dog. It was difficult because they tried to keep the police stuff away from us as much as possible. So it was only every now and again, and what I heard through the grapevine and what I could see for myself when I had to go down and clean those blocks. But yeah, most of the dogs were in there a minimum of like 5-6 months. Some of them had been in there for years.
So from time to time, we send assessors in to see the dogs, and our experience has been that the assessors can never get into the police kennels to see where the dogs are kept. Did you ever see any assessors coming into your kennels?
No. The only people that I know are the police that assess the dogs to see if they're safe to be released. Those are the only people that I've ever seen come in. I don't even think the police officers who bring the dogs are allowed to go into the kennels to see where they're kept. It was a handover from the police in the courtyard, from the police to the kennel owners, and that was it. Even the police officers wouldn't get to see where they were going.
And was there any form of inspection or assessment of these kennels that you ever saw whilst you were there?
Not whilst I was there. I think they did happen. I think the police obviously must have at some point had to come out. I remember there being, I'm sure there was an issue with when one of the puppies got out. I think the bars weren't big enough to hold litters of puppies. So when they were only a few weeks old, I'm pretty sure one of the pups got out, and there was somebody sent out after that, because the pup was killed by another dog. It was only like 2 weeks old or something, and they sent someone out after that. But I wasn't there. I wasn't really told about much.
Did you
didn't see anyone coming in the time that I was there.
Did you hear how that happened? A puppy escaping and then being killed, or?
Yes, well, it's pretty easy to put it together. It's the pups at that point, they were just kept in the kennel with their mum. They were only a few weeks old, so the pup had just managed to squeeze its way out through the bars. It fell out and just made its way and wandered into the next again dog's kennel.
And we know that unfortunately puppies are sometimes born in kennels, or they are seized. How are puppies treated?
Awfully. They keep them. They stay with. So it happened twice when I was there that a mother dog had a litter of puppies whilst I was there. And pits and pit types have large litters. I think they were about 10 or 12 both times, maybe 9 to 12 puppies in both litters. And yeah, so they're kept with the mum. They were kept with the mum for the first 2 weeks, and then they were taken away. They were put in a large size dog crate that you'd buy in the shop, which isn't big enough for a large dog. All 10, so they were separated. I remember there were 6 puppies in one crate and 6 puppies in another. So they were just stacked on top of each other in a shed, basically. It was just a tiny little shed, and that is where they lived their all day, every day. They were in that crate with their 5 brothers and sisters, peeing, pooing, biting. They were covered in cuts. They were covered in feces. There was just no cleaning them. You were lucky if you went in twice a day to clean them out, but it was a pointless task because they were just so cramped, and so you just couldn't keep them clean. At which point, so they stayed in there for about 4 or 5 weeks, maybe longer, and then they were all put to sleep at 9 weeks old, I think. That was the day that I decided to leave, was the day that they put all those 12 puppies to sleep. And weren't going to pay for them to be housed.
And who puts the dogs to sleep? Do they bring in?
A vet comes in every single Wednesday to put the dogs to sleep.
And I know it's probably difficult to say, But on a typical Wednesday, how long would the vet's list be?
So it included the strays as well. So I think one of the worst days that I was there was something like 12 dogs to be put to sleep. It was usually an average of maybe 3, 4. Yeah, 3 or 4. That was like for most of these dogs. It'd been the first time they'd been out of the kennel since they got there. They were pretty much strangled along the way and dragged to this bench which they were given a drug called ACP. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yes, I have.
It's an old style drug. They were given a lot of these tablets, so these dogs were disorientated. They couldn't walk, a lot of them, but they were still being like handled like they were going to chew somebody's face off. But they could barely walk in a straight line. Their legs weren't coordinated. They were drooling. Some of them were that unconscious that like you weren't allowed to carry them, so you had to wake them up enough to get them to walk. But just some of them just couldn't move. And yeah, so they were walked into this place where they made their dogs food every day, and that was it. That was where they were put to sleep, and that was their time at those kennels.
What happened to the dogs after they were put to sleep? Do you know?
I think they get put in bags and taken away by the vets.
And these were vets who were they employed by the police? Do you know anything about the vets?
Yeah, so it was a contract. By the police that they owned a local vets nearby, and it was just like a side contract that the police paid for the vet to come out and assess the animals. And he did all the vet work. He did all, like, if there was wounds or injuries or if the dogs needed medication, they would come out and do that. But
and were wounds and injuries common?
yeah, so there was lots of self-mutilation wounds, in both the stray dogs and the police dogs, but mostly the police dogs. But those obviously never got treated because we weren't allowed to put topical medication on them. We weren't allowed to touch them. So unless the wound was really serious, literally nothing would get done. They were given antibiotics if they were lucky. But yeah, there was lots of broken tails from hitting off the kennel walls that are too close together. You find that a lot. These tails never stop. And it's what breaks my heart so much, is they're always such happy dogs regardless. So their tails never stop, but the amount of them that had big sores on their legs and on their tails and on their bodies where they've just sat and chewed because they've had nothing else to do other than chew themselves.
How did that make you feel as a person who'd gone into these kennels as a kennel hand?
Awful. It's actually something that I had to block out a lot of. This was my first real experience working in the dog world, and I'd worked so hard to get there that I from the first week I was there, I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. I had nowhere to go. It was a new area. I didn't know how to get another job. But yeah, it made me feel like a bit of a monster, being this person who at all points will try and advocate for animal welfare, but would work in such a horrible place. The only way that I got through it was knowing that when I was there, at least the dogs got some attention. Because although we weren't allowed to touch them, when nobody was looking, of course I did. And that's how I know these dogs are just such lovely dogs. You can tell if a dog's going to bite you or if a dog's aggressive. And to be honest, the amount of aggressive dogs, so we had capacity for 114 dogs from the police. That was how big their contract was. That's how many kennels we had. And maybe out of those 114, which were nearly almost always full, out of those you were lucky if maybe 5 of them were too aggressive to be touched, if you're lucky. And even those dogs could have probably been understood by someone who knew what they were doing. But yeah, absolutely all dogs were treated with a blanket. You don't go near them. Even the ones that are just desperately trying to jump up and look at you and are trying to lick your legs on the way past, and you have to push them away with this horrible shovel. And no, it was an awful, awful place to be.
You said you had to have a shovel. Tell us about the shovel, please.
So the shovel was our only our only safety. It was, so we'd go into the kennels, because none of these kennels were splitter kennels. So most of the dogs were trained, like I say, to take a chew and to take it up to the back of the kennel, so we could go in and clean out the kennels and things. But most of them didn't. They were just so happy to have somebody in there that they'd want to come over and they would want to jump up, get overexcited. So yeah, you had to have this shovel, which was just to shovel the poo up, but also to make sure there was a barrier between you and these dogs. One of the girls who I worked with, shortly after I left, she was actually badly bitten by one of these dogs. And I know the dog, all it was that she was just overexcited, and she was jumping up and trying to grab the leads that so we had to carry leads around our necks, just in case anything ever happened and we could get the lead over them and get them away. But it was something for them to play with. Like, these dogs didn't have anything to play with, so we came in and they would try and grab the leads, they would jump up, and it got her arm eventually, and it was quite bad.
From when we last spoke, you mentioned to me that you were required to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah, if I remember, yeah.
Was that with the police or was that with the kennels?
The kennels. I never saw the police had anything to do with the police. So I was employed by the kennels as a kennel assistant for the stray kennels, basically. I wasn't supposed to have anything to do with the other kennels, but there was only like 3 of us, so we had to. Like, sometimes at full capacity, there was no way that I couldn't. They didn't need to use me as well. But yeah, no, it was the kennels that.
Do you think that the police officers that housed the dogs in those kennels had any idea of the conditions that they were kept in?
I honestly think they didn't care. The police obviously knew, because they would send the officers in to assess the dogs. I know it's a different officer from a different part of that, and there'd be a lot of officers if they did come in. But no, I think a lot of them just didn't care, didn't think to bother to ask or to look, or just took what they were told as that's it.
And for the avoidance of doubt, you were working in an area controlled by South Yorkshire Police.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, down by Doncaster. Yeah.
Yeah, which and you've now moved on.
Yes.
How has this experience left you feeling?
Do you know, it's something that for a lot of years I've completely I blocked out and not thought about it. It wasn't until the other day, and I realised I do that with a lot of things. It's my coping mechanism. I mean, there was a lot of quite bad stuff going on in my life at the time. So it was just something else. It was just something else that I just blocked out and ignored. But every now and again, I speak to people about it, and I think about it, and I think about how wrong it actually was. And these people are trusting the police with their dogs for no good reason a lot of the time as well. For at least 90% of those dogs, they had no reason to be in there, not one reason. But through months and months and months of being treated like vermin, these dogs became aggressive. They became unrehomable. They were treated like they were aggressive, so they became aggressive. That is how dogs work. It blows my mind sometimes that, I mean, I'm glad I left when I did. Like, I didn't last long. I lasted maybe 5-6 months. I actually have my dog out of it. I took him and left.
Yeah. So
he
we
was
should
going to
ask,
sleep as well.
what sort of dog did you take with you out of this?
He's like a Springer Spaniel Collie cross pointer sort of thing.
And do you know why your dog was put in there in the first place?
He was picked up as a stray, so he came into the stray kennels, but he was going to be put to sleep, which I couldn't sit with. He is the loveliest dog, but they rehomed him to an older couple, and they brought him back because he pulled on the lead, which he doesn't even need a lead. He's one of these dogs, he will literally just walk next to you constantly. He just doesn't. But yeah, they brought him back, and their policy was if somebody brought their dog back from rehoming, then it got put to sleep. It didn't get a second chance. So it was like, no, that's it, I'm going. And I handed my notice in, and I said I'd pay for him, and I left.
And have they made you pay for him as well?
Yeah, I paid 50 quid for him.
And how is he doing now?
He's absolutely fine. So I think I've had him about 5 years, I think. He's great. So he had lung cancer last year, but he seems to have completely bounced back from it. He had it removed. I took him down because I went to veterinary surgery. I went to to become a vet nurse after I left the kennels. So yeah, he had a quarter of his lung removed last year. So he's doing absolutely fine with it. He's doing really well.
So you're now a vet nurse and you're working.
Yeah, well, I didn't get qualified, but yeah.
Oh, you're now working with a veterinary practice. How would you feel if your veterinary practice took up one of these contracts?
I'd be appalled. There's no way that I'd want to be any part of it. I don't think I would never work with a vet's practice that did that again. The same as I would never work in a kennels that did that again. I would never work with a vet. I don't agree that the only reason that vet could have had for doing that was money. And that's the problem with so many of them. I would not want to work with a vet whose only problem was money.
Lynn, I'm extremely grateful to you for speaking to us. You're happy for us to make an audio recording of this available?
Yes.